Konnichiwa! I'm Alex with Lexico Moto Gymkhana and welcome back for yet another lesson in the Moto Gymkhana Setup Series videos. Now in this lesson, we're going to be discussing suspension. And as I mentioned towards the beginning of this series, in the tire and tire pressure video, motorcycle suspension is a bit of a dark art. And for people that are new to it, it can be a little bit scary, a little bit intimidating. It can take a while to really grasp what is going on with motorcycle suspension. That's what it was like for me when I first started learning about this stuff. But I want to offer you some encouragement. Take it step by step. Learn about motorcycle suspension. Anyone can do it. And you are going to be a much better rider if you understand suspension. You're going to realize that as you take more and more advanced level training in motorcycling, you start to talk more and more about suspension and what's going on with the suspension. Now, if you get your suspension tuned correctly, you're going to get a lot of benefit. You're going to have increased stability, traction, increased or better handling, and more comfort during your ride. And as I talked about in the introduction video of this series, when you have all of those things, you're going to have greater confidence. So suspension and correct suspension setup is going to give you a lot of confidence, which is key to going faster. Now, in this video, I'm not going to talk in detail about suspension settings and about what suspension is all about because it would take way too long. It would take another 10 videos. There are entire books written about motorcycle suspension. And so in this video, I'm just going to give you some quick recommendations. Some stuff that's going to be a little bit more Moto Gymkhana specific. Now, if you're completely new to motorcycle suspension and you want to get started, a really good place that I recommend starting, and this is where I started, is to read the Total Control book by Lee Parks. Total Control Edition 2. Now, he has a specific chapter on suspension, another one on chassis tuning, and pretty much the whole book really helps you understand how a suspension works, what can go wrong with it, and why the techniques that we use have so much to do with the suspension. Now, if you're a little bit more advanced, another resource that I'm going to highly recommend is Dave Moss Tuning. If you don't know who Dave Moss is, find out right away. Right? This guy is like a Jedi master of suspension tuning. He has an outstanding YouTube channel, and his website is even better. If you like his work, I'm going to strongly recommend that you subscribe to his website. It's about $50 a year. Throw some money his way because he definitely deserves your support. You will learn everything you need to know from Dave Moss. So check out his website, Dave Moss Tuning. Now, once again, if you're brand new at setting suspension, make sure that you find someone in your area who can help you out. If it's going to be more basic type stuff, find a mechanic who understands the fundamentals of suspension. Shout out once again to my buddy Mike from Moto Mecha YouTube channel. He helps me with a lot of my basic suspension stuff. And for more specialized things, you can look for a suspension tuner in your area. About an hour and a half away, I have Race Tech in Corona, California. That's where I took my new motorcycle for revalving and respringing the motorcycle. So check out what's available in your area if you're brand new so you don't feel too intimidated. Now, if you are lucky enough to be on a motorcycle with a more adjustable suspension, this, of course, is going to be ideal because you're going to be able to really dial in your preload and your damping settings, your compression and rebound. But even if you're on a more budget motorcycle with a more basic suspension, and let's say you don't have the money to upgrade to a more adjustable suspension, that's okay. Because even on a basic suspension, there are still plenty of things that you can adjust to optimize your basic suspension. You can make sure that your springs have the correct spring rate for your weight and size. You can experiment with fork oil height or how much fork oil is in the forks. You could also experiment with fork oil viscosity or the thickness of the oil. You can also experiment with fork height, and you can also experiment with rear preload. Usually, even a budget motorcycle is going to have some level of adjustability with the rear shock or rear suspension. Now, with my Ninja 300, it came with a very basic suspension. The damping was already pretty adequate, and I like to experiment with the geometry of the suspension by messing around with the 5 levels that I had of rear preload and the fork heights in the front of the motorcycle. Once again, if you're new to suspension, find a suspension tuner in your area who can check to make sure that you have the right springs in your suspension and that your fork oil height and viscosity is appropriate for your type of riding. As I mentioned in the previous video, a lot of what we're doing on the motorcycle is going to affect the geometry of the motorcycle. So whether it's brake and throttle inputs, the movement of our body weight back and forth, it's all going to affect the geometry. And these geometry changes are so important that I'm literally thinking about these geometry changes in real time as I'm going around a Moto Gymkhana course, especially the movement of the front forks, the extension and the compression of the front forks. This is why it's so important that we have our suspension set up correctly, or we're not going to enjoy the benefits of these geometry changes, which is what makes us go around the cone quickly. Now, a lot of these suspension geometry changes have to do with the shortening of the wheelbase of the motorcycle. Generally, when the wheelbase is shorter, a motorcycle is going to be able to make a tight turn much quicker. This is why many advanced Moto Gymkhana riders, especially in Japan, I've noticed, have aftermarket swing arms that are shorter than the stock swing arms. Now, this is usually going to run you well over $1,000 to purchase one of these. I don't really have the money to spend on something like that right now, but something that you could do is related to something that I talked about earlier in the series, which is sprocket changes. Now, as you might remember, I like to make my rear sprocket larger as opposed to making the front sprocket smaller. And this is because when we make the rear sprocket a little bit larger, it could have the effect of bringing the rear wheel forward, thus decreasing our wheelbase and helping our motorcycle make it around cones a little bit quicker. So just something to look into and something to consider. Now, related to the shortening of the wheelbase, and something that, once again, I'm always thinking about is the compression of the front forks, because when the front forks compress, this is going to shorten the wheelbase of the bike, helping us make it around cones a little bit quicker. And if you don't have your forks set up correctly, and if they are not compressing enough, you are not going to be really maximizing that shortening of the wheelbase. So many people know about putting a zip tie on the front fork and measuring and seeing how much your front fork is compressing. If it is not compressing enough, it could be because maybe your spring is too firm, maybe you're using a fork oil that's a little bit too thick, or maybe there's too much fork oil in the fork. It also could be a problem of preload adjustment and damping adjustment. Once again, if you're not sure about how to resolve this issue, if you're not getting enough front fork compression, talk to a suspension tuner. They could help you figure it out. Because you also could have the opposite problem. You could be compressing the fork too deep, which could cause traction problems. So you want to check that out right away. Another thing that we want to consider when it comes to Moto Gymkhana specifically is that when we're rounding a cone, making a tight U-turn, the magic moment starts to happen. The self-steering effect starts to turn the handlebars on their own. I recommend that we start adding a little bit of throttle, use the rear brake, and shift the upper body backwards a little bit. All of these things are going to shift the center of mass of the rider and the bike backwards, and that weight shift helps tighten up our turn around a cone. This is once again why it's so important that our motorcycle suspension is set correctly, because if it is not set correctly and the geometry is off, especially if the front end of the motorcycle is a little bit too low. When we go to make that weight shift happen, the weight is not going to shift back enough, and we're not going to be able to take advantage of the lightening up of the front end of the motorcycle. So we want to make sure that our geometry is set correctly. Now, this is something that anyone on any suspension can experiment with. Now, I generally don't like to experiment with the rear geometry of the motorcycle. I like to make my geometry experiments happen in the front end of the motorcycle. We can raise or lower the front end of the motorcycle by either increasing or decreasing preload, or if you need to make a larger adjustment to the geometry, or maybe you don't have preload adjustment, what we can do is we can loosen up the front fork clamps and we can move the front forks up and down in the clamps, and we can experiment that way. Now, you'd be surprised how much more stable and confident you're going to feel while leaned over deep and making those tight turns when you get the geometry adjustment correct. We want to make sure that we are making small adjustments over a long period of time, just like we were with the tire pressures. So once again, break out your log, make changes of about 3 or 4 millimeters at a time, take notes of what you're feeling, and figure it out. It could take you a few weeks, maybe a few months, but once again, if you get that geometry setting correct, it's going to make you feel way more confident during Moto Gymkhana tight turns around a cone. Now, something else to consider when it comes to geometry and suspension is the center of mass of the motorcycle. If you've got a motorcycle that's a little bit top heavy, the center of mass is a little too high. If we lower the motorcycle a little bit, it's going to help us feel a little bit more stable, and it's going to make the handling feel a little bit lighter side to side. So the way we lower a motorcycle is in the rear, we use a lowering link, and in the front, we can raise the fork tubes up a little bit in the clamps to lower the front end of the motorcycle. Now, you want to make sure you're not overdoing this, because the lower the center of mass is on the motorcycle, the more the bike has to lean to make it through a turn. So you don't want to exaggerate this either. There is trade-offs here. And whenever you lower the motorcycle, you always want to make sure that you are not losing the geometry front to back of the motorcycle. You want to make sure that it's still correct. So if you're going to make a change of this sort, talk to a suspension tuner and make sure you're getting help from a professional. And once again, if you have an adjustable suspension, you want to make sure that your rebound damping setting is set correctly. We need to make sure the rebound is set because we're going to be doing a whole lot of aggressive flip-flopping side to side. We need to have that rebound set correctly. We're going to have a whole lot of wallowing around. I like to keep my rebound damping set just a little tiny bit firmer than I would for commuting. And as far as compression damping, I like to keep my rear shock compression set to medium. And I like my front fork compression to be a little tiny bit on the soft side. Because we're not really experiencing the same physical forces as you would on a track, it doesn't really make sense to go firm with the front fork compression setting. I want to make sure that front fork is compressing, so I like to keep my compression damping set just a little bit softer. Now, if you don't have adjustable damping settings, you can always experiment with fork oil thickness and fork oil height to experiment with different damping settings. All right, riders, so I think that that's about all I'm going to talk about when it comes to suspension. Once again, there's way too much to learn and talk about when it comes to suspension. Check out Total Control. Check out Dave Moss Tuning especially, and you'll learn everything you need to know about suspension. Riders, I've got one more video planned for you guys, so I'll see you guys at the last video lesson. Until then, arigato and peace.